Hi folks. The purpose of this video is just to give you a little bit of guidance on your Mod 5 memo assignment, and that includes walking you through this optional ISLM tool. So your assignment is to analyze an economic shock, or actually it could be more than one shock, as we'll see, and then also the stabilization policies that were enacted in response to that shock, and we want you to use the ISLM, including the diagram. Now, in terms of the diagram, you can do this on your own. You can get help from a book, or alternatively, the little spreadsheet that we provide you may be of some help. Now, compared to the previous ISLM, you may have a bit more freedom here. You can choose some of the numbers, and that kind of adds to the realism. So let's go to the spreadsheet. So anyway, you can see here that we have the ISLM. Here's the downward sloping IS and the upward sloping LM curve. We've also put in a line just for zero, for the zero interest rate. We want to remind you that the output gap here on the horizontal axis, the way to think about that is that this is the difference in percent relative to what we like to call potential or full employment output. So let's suppose that full employment output is 18 trillion. Let's say if we're down here at -1, that means that's 18 trillion minus 180 billion. So that's how to be thinking about that. In terms of the long run interest rate, you can actually choose. You have a little bit of leeway here. You don't want to be too extreme here on your baseline rate of interest. We chose 4%. That's historically close to where we've been. We're a little bit lower. I'm thinking about a long-term treasury bond, which is now about 3%. But in any event, you have some leeway. But at the same time, remember you have this axis here, and unless you're very good with reformatting axes in Excel charts, you probably just keep this pretty much close to where it is. So in any event, the idea is that we're going to start off with sort of our baseline scenario. We're already in some kind of inequilibrium, which means that we're precluding any kind of change in the demand for goods and services, or any kind of change in the demand for money. And then in this column, okay, we have the opportunity here to put a shock, and it could be a shock to the demand for goods and services, and we're going to show one in just a second. Or alternatively, it could be a shock to money demand, and we'll try that too. We want to try these shocks separately so you can get a feel for what we're doing, each of these shocks separately. But then we'll leave it up to you as to what the nature of the shock was in the assignment. Now, in terms of policies, then these shocks will carry over into this next column here. You don't have to repeat them. They are implicitly there, so whatever number you put here will be implicitly in this scenario. And then you think about, well, okay, the government may counteract that by, for example, some kind of fiscal policy, or they may also counteract the shock with some kind of monetary policy. So now let's try a shock. Let's say, for example, you have a very severe retrenchment in demand. Let's say something like minus 3%, which is pretty big. And you can see already that we have this is a little bit misleading just right now, because right now there is no policy here. So shock plus policy, this is just the shock here. But you can see that we have lower output. We have output less than equilibrium, and then we also have a lower interest rate as we walk down the LM curve. And then what will happen over here is that, okay, we say, well, okay, let's suppose that the government wants to do something about this. They want to make sure that the shock is not so bad. One way they can do that is they can put a little bit of money into people's pockets through a tax cut. So we're going to put here, it's a -2% of GDP tax cut, and you can see that that's going to ameliorate somewhat. But you're free to compare that tax cut of 2% to a spending increase of 2%. You also see that we walk up a little bit here on the IS curve, the LM curve, a little bit higher interest rate. Alternatively, you can see that, well, maybe the central bank has to step in with some kind of a monetary policy. So let's try that. Let's say that we have a 1% increase in monetary policy in money supply here. And what happens here is the interest rate goes down. And once again, we have stimulated output a little bit because we've reduced the interest rate even further. And that brings us a little bit further back to our our potential or full employment output. So in any event, okay, I've just given you I think just an example of one shock here, and then how that shock may be counteracted with policies. We do want to remind you, you can also be thinking about an increased a change in money demand. For example, we showed an increase in money demand, and you can see that if this increase in money demand, that's associated with a decrease in output. Well, spending is being crowded out. Why is it being crowded out? Because of the higher interest rate. So you want to think about what might be a policy to counteract that. In any event, we hope that you find this helpful in thinking about your policies, and your shocks and your policies, and helping you do your memo assignment for Mod 5. So thank you very much.